Kiss. Keep it simple, stupid.
Hashtag look it up. Hashtag look it up. Hashtag look it up.
What is this? Where am I?
Let's make deposits into the bank of knowledge. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Trebles Show. I am Trebles Garcia, and I want to thank the Lord for allowing me to be here today. And I want to thank every single one of you for allowing me to enter your space. Guys, new home, new life, new style of recording, and I got the microphone waving. I got the new hat going. And if you haven't already done so, I want to remind you that the most important thing that you can do for the show is word of mouth. Check us out on YouTube, and if you haven't already done so, like, share, and subscribe, guys. The book is out. Go check out Liminal Trees. It's $10.95. There's no reason to complain about the freaking prices. And if you hit me up directly, I could sell it to you, and I'll send you a signed copy alongside one of these beautiful Trebles hats. You already know it's a relic. It's a one-time off, and it will never be made again. So now that we're at the journey, at the growing process of the show, make sure you guys grab one, cough one up, because it's gonna be earned. It's gonna be a lot of money in the next, I want to say, 5 to 10 years, guys. I'm just saying. I'm the conspiracy poppy. I'm just saying. I'm not gonna stop until this freaking fat lady sings. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, let's jump in from the deep end of the pool and set the freaking mood. My next special guest hasn't been here before. He is no stranger to danger, though. Make sure you guys give him a warm welcome. He's an illustrator. He's about to be an author, about to publish his book on Nimrod. He is also a space-time pirate. Make sure you guys give your hands up for Marx. What's up, Marx? How you doing today, bro?
Hey, I'm doing well. Good to meet you, and I'm excited to see where this conversation heads.
Absolutely, bro. You guys make sure to check him out on all social media platforms, and it's going to be on the description of the show. Let them know where they can find you. What's the name of your handle on social media, bro?
Yeah, all my stuff, if you just go to my link tree, you can find all my social media links, my Patreon, my Meta Mindcast, where I talk about various esoteric subjects. And that is Linktree RMARX, and that'll pull up everything. And that also has my Etsy and my website with my artwork and illustration and all that various stuff as well.
Exciting stuff, bro. I like the fact that you're a creator and you're illustrating, you're putting art together, and you're also putting out information on social media and doing your rounds. And mad shout outs to the Sixth Century podcast. We haven't been able to connect professionally or I want to say formally, but I've seen you on his show, so I decided to take a nudge, and a great networker, and he's an amazing dude. A great show too as well. Make sure you guys check him out. Dude, if you guys are having a hard time finding him, again, the Linktree link is going to be in the description of this show. Today, we're going to start the conversation off. First of all, thank you so freaking much for being here today. It means the freaking world. The reason I'm saying is because a lot of people say thank you just because they want a buck. I don't do this for a living, bro. I don't do this for money, bro. I do this out of sheer passion, out of love for the sport, and because it keeps me sober. I get to be a superhero behind this freaking mic. So alongside of that, I also want to share that I love sharing, communicating, and having awesome conversations with people that are like-minded and not so like-minded, and that have passion projects like yourself, especially with this book. Tell me a little bit about the book before I give you the first question.
Yeah, basically with the book, when the pandemic happened, I was doing a lot of stuff in the music industry, and the music industry kind of collapsed. So I kind of had some time on my hands, and I have been consistently reading and listening to books and for like the last 35 years. And I've been deep into like ancient texts and, esoteric work. And so I kind of had seen this story that I hadn't really seen anybody talk about, which is essentially this idea of Nimrod being the first skinwalker in the histories. And so I kind of put that all together and built the timeline around it and kind of incorporated all the esoteric subjects into it. And this is all pre-biblical. So this would be like, in around Genesis, early beginnings of Genesis.
The crazy times.
Times
of Genesis. Yeah, man. I want to give mad shout outs also and dedicate this episode to Juhamari Juhasnami Petinem. Not sure if I've messed up your name. I think you're from the Philippines. Correct me if I'm wrong. Or Vietnam. You just followed us on Instagram. Mad shout outs and respect. Thank you so much for engaging and leaving comments and liking stuff on Instagram. Guys, make sure you guys check us out on Instagram and on YouTube. That's right. This episode goes out to you. I'm not going to repeat your name because it's super hard. Yo, Marx, You said something about mystery schools. Talk
Right.
to me, bro. Where does this start? What is it? Explain to me. Brand new subject for me.
Yeah, so when you go back into the line of Noah, moving into Cush and Ham, it was Ham within the Ethiopian region that initially set up the worship of gods and the supplication, sacrifices, and all the ritual rites associated with it that they brought into Egypt.
Huh.
And this ties into what is it, Phrygia as well. And there's an argument between who has the oldest mysteries. And Egypt kind of, they did this project where they sent out a shepherd with two young children, one from each country, and whoever spoke first, they said that would be who the oldest language was. And it ended up being the word for bread, which was a Phoenician word. So they believe the Phoenicians came before the Egyptians. But nonetheless, Cush and Ham bringing these pre-Diluvian rites coming, from ancient Atoll or Atlantis kind of into the New World,
Mhm.
which this is what drove Noah to drink, was what was going on with Ham and Cush, specifically Ham. And Ham, his offspring is Nimrod. So you have this lineage kind of handed down. And Nimrod, he was trying to, he turned against he turned against the face of God. He
Mhm.
basically was working to become a Gaborim. Kind of, he was like associated with all the fallen offspring, the Rephaim, and the lower classes of giants that were still remaining. And
Mhm.
but this bringing these religious practices that they brought from the pre-dilute before the flood into the new world. This is what they set up in Egypt. And Cush is associated with Thoth and
Haha.
Ham. Yeah, yeah. So and Idris as well, and then you have Hermes and Mercury carrying that forth, into the Roman Empire. But yeah, so it's kind of this early practice that was brought from pre-Diluvian times that they brought into Egypt, that's and Phrygia, and kind of spread into Syria with Adonis, kind of spread in. You have Attis and Kybele and the Phrygian mysteries.
Mhm.
You have just and you can see that walking slowly into Greece, because all
Mhm.
the Grecian philosophers, they were sending all of their highest educated and all of their philosophers into Egypt to basically learn these mysteries, and I don't know if you heard, but they actually have recently found with LIDAR the ancient labyrinth that's next to the Egyptian pyramids.
Dude, shut the front door, bro.
Yeah, yeah. And you have a couple of ancient philosophers, Greek philosophers, that talked about, they went to Egypt and they were initiated into the mysteries in this labyrinth. And they said it was even a greater work than the pyramids themselves, as far as the size of it. When you stood on top, it was a field of stone. And then you would be taken, and there was something like 3,000 rooms. And if you went in, you'd have to have somebody guide you because you couldn't get back out. But they basically took you into the first level, and that's where the mysteries were, right? But then the second level
Mhm.
below that, all of the various like high level governors of the various nomes that were set up around Egypt. They all donated and built the second level that was underneath the labyrinth. That was basically for them to go down and do sacrifices and administrate
Huh.
justice. And they've actually found with these LiDAR scans, the first level is completely flooded. But the second level below that, they believe, is dry, because there's this ring that's built around it. But nonetheless, that labyrinth, Flanders Petrie, he said that the people in that area, they didn't like the fact that these mysteries were going on, and this kind of gets into Set or Seth, from the line of Noah, coming in and shutting down the Osirian mysteries, which were based around this kind of phallic worship. They would carry a large phallus, and there's just a lot of back and forth between. You got to read the two sides because a lot of times Osiris, they make it really pure. But if you read the Sethian side coming from the line of Seth, then who becomes Set, their ultimate enemy? He becomes like this desert dog that's like either black or painted red, short hair with a long snout and ears that they clipped off so they were square on the ends, and it had a long tail with either a bush or it was forked, and it's associated with the typhoon and all the like evil kind of energies. But then if you flip the script on the other side, it's associated with the line of Seth from Noah. So you kind of have to take into account both sides of, and it's interesting also because the founders of these mysteries, when you get into the early fire worship, and it was either lightning coming down, which was ancient Gibal, right? That's what they called it, and it was like a friendly entity that provided rain for the crops, but also was vengeful and would bring down, the lightning and like create fires. And it was Nimrod that was said to first start worshiping these fires, and he's the one that is considered to be the first Freemason when they built the Tower of Babel. So it carries thickly, and how it's spread out, and it basically becomes like a Isis, right? She's known as Meronymus in Greece, means the one of many names or 1,000 names. So you see this philosophy like spreading out as the military and as the merchants are moving. These were the cults of the military and the merchants. That's why Mercury is he's the like the patron saint of liars, beggars, thieves, merchants, and so it kind of gets into this idea of Mercury, right? And the people that worshipped him were called the Merkers, and those Merkers became the mercantilists, which is where we get the modern, and that comes through the Phoenician systems and the spreading out, during that time. And I've traced the Phoenician, I've traced the Phoenicians back into ancient Iran and northern Euphrates kind of area, and all this stuff I've done shows on. If you go to the Meta Mindcast, you can kind of see the different subjects, and I kind of list all the sources and give you the specifics and kind of where you can find all the information and everything.
Great database, bro. Huge. In fact, you had a mouthful, and I didn't want to interrupt because you were flowing, bro. I didn't want to interrupt.
Yeah.
I think very historic, very educational stuff, bro. Not very controversial because not very conspiratorial because it's just history. The fact that you mentioned that there's two sides of the story, right? It gives to show that his story and whoever you worship for, whoever you worship or whoever you serve is the story that's going to be dominant in your tribe, in your culture. Correct. And then you'll spread that out and eventually go to war with other people for beliefs because there's a lot of bloodshed involved as well. Yeah,
which is what we're seeing going on right now in the world, which is why it's the whole idea, if you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it. And a lot of people are like, why are you worried about these ancient things? Because they directly apply to what is happening in the world right now, as far as Baal worship and getting into Moloch.
I was gonna ask you,
kind of running down these various roads.
I was going to ask you, just to prolong the conversation and get back to that, to where you started. Give me a few examples, bro. How our history is repeating, or at least echoing, on today's age.
Well, you go back into the Star of Chin, or it's called the Star of Refesh, which is basically the alchemical star. It's the fire with the upward facing triangle and the water with the downward facing triangle, and that alchemically, when you bring that fire and water together, it sublimates and creates the steam that is the creative energetic force for creating or manipulating reality itself. So
that star sounds familiar.
Oh yeah. But that kind of, you can see that star in the worship of Moloch, and there was an ancient tradition that when a sacrifice was made, that it was always, and you see this also in the story of Cain and Abel almost, right? But it was always the firstborn that was the best and strongest, that was, had no blemish, that, and this was the mechanism by which they would supplicate for, the sin that in Adam, in the first altar there, the sin of supplicating for eating of the fruit, and knowing of the knowledge of good and evil, and so it's kind of a thing that's been carried all through history, as far as this first of the sacrifices, which kind of got, I think, at a certain point taken to the extreme when it crossed over and they started sacrificing their sons and daughters. And you see this
Oh,
consistently in the histories, from ancient Tarsus, where Saul came from, Saul of Tarsus, Paul. You see this in ancient Cana and Babylon. You see that even within Egypt, they're sacrificing red-headed men specifically, and they would take their ashes and take a winnowing fan and scatter them on the fields for fertility. So there's always this idea, and it kind of gets into the maypole and the May King, where you see later in time where the May King would be select, and this is kind of the Mardi Gras where you get the king cake and the baby is in the cake, right? They
yeah.
would put they would put a piece of coal in the cake, and whoever got that piece of coal was the May King, and he would just get all the food lavished upon him, and like the women would swarm around him, and he would live beautiful for one day because he became the May King. And then they would sacrifice him for the fields, and if you get in,
Yo.
oh yeah, and if you get into James G. Frazier's work, he basically says this is symbolic of taking the crop and separating the seed from the wheat from the chaff, and replanting the seed. So it's this idea of like a sympathetic type magic, which you get into in a lot of these early agriculture, because you figure these are hunter gatherers that are coming
Right.
out and beginning to, farm. And that's, you have the rainmakers, and, they're able to call down rain by drawing circles. And there's instances of that in the Quran, going way back further than that. But it was like but even Noah's, like priesthood that kind of, came off of Noah, after they landed after the deluge, they became the Zadok priests, and that kind of got pushed through the priesthood of Aaron later on. But yeah, it's the sacrifices, they were generally to supplicate the deity in order to facilitate the growing of the crops to feed the people for the growing city states and walled-in cities that were developing at the time.
Still to this day, we see a lot of sacrifice, and
Oh
we live
yeah.
in a spiritual war, man. I like people think it's more. People really think it's not. People think it's a physical thing. Everything alters your brain, and everything is a ritual. Even gestures,
Hmm.
have some type of implication that has to do with magic or ritual or
Dance.
sacrifices. Yeah,
Oh yeah.
yeah, man, 1000%. So I wanted to touch base on what you said about before we started recorded. You mentioned something about Nimrod being the first skinwalker. Extremely important for me. I
Oh
love
yeah.
this type
Yeah.
of stuff.
Yeah.
Break that down. I don't want to. I don't know if I'm spoiling your book or not, but I would want to get at
Yeah,
least
not
a
at
little.
all. Not at
Yeah,
all.
man. Let me know what
It's
you think
it's
about
I
that.
mean, the book itself, I mean, we're looking at somewhere around 450 to 550 pages, depending upon how the font size is, basically.
Mm,
But it's this whole thing. So you have, in the beginning, Adam being ejected, right? And he becomes the first tiller of the soil, right? That's where the word husband comes from, being the tiller of the soil itself, right? And so he's associated with this red dirt, and that has a certain, and then you got to figure he was in paradise, right? So when he fell down into matter, none of the animals were afraid of him because he smelled heavenly. So that's why when all the animals come and he's naming the animals, they're not afraid of him, because basically he's still part of the divine, right? So, he's raised, and I just released a episode on the bloodline of Adam and Eve and kind of how that goes off into the secrets of Enoch, right? But Adam, when he died, they basically broke down his body and preserved the skin, and used the same myrrh and frankincense and these
Necromancy
antimicrobial.
stuff.
Oh yeah, yeah. But it's antimicrobial. It's anti. It basically, and they would seal the skin like a pelt, basically.
Mm.
And there's documentation. And this is all non-canonical, so this is like a theodicy. What we're doing is we're looking at the ideas that shaped the history of what became modern day Catholicism and Christianity, and all the schisms that have proceeded from that, right? But they took Adam's body, and if you look in the Cave of Treasures, if you look in the Book of Adam and Eve, if you look in, there's several books out there that detail this story. It's also in the Book of Jasher, which was a text that was written while the Jews were in Babylonian exile. It might have been slightly after, but it was within a reasonable time of when the first 5 books of the Bible were written, right? And so nonetheless, the skin, this preserved skin, you also have what they call the Kaaba of a man, which would be all your bones, right? And there was a Kaaba of man in the heavens, that basically reflected on the earth and created Adam being the Kaaba of man on the earthly realm. And these bones, like Osiris, he was also related with this idea of the Kaaba of man, and they called his bones were represented by lodestone, which is that black magnetic, hematite, or some kind of a black magnetic stone. Basically, adamant is also a black magnetic stone. But they basically transport his remains onto the ark, and they bring it into the new world. And if you get into the Babylonian Talmud, and we're talking about a 10,000 page document here, this thing's huge. But they detail that after they came off the ark, that they basically carry the body of Adam to the place they call the center of the earth, and they they deposit his skull into this place, which becomes Golgotha, right? And this is the mystery of Golgotha, right? When you get into Christianity, where Christ was crucified is Golgotha, and that is the place of the skull. That is where Adam's skull was put into the earth, and possibly his bones as well. And it relates to a cave called, I'll remember it here in a minute, but there was a pre-Diluvian cave where the couple's remains were laid away, and when they brought them over in the flood, but nonetheless, the skin itself, and this is documented in the Bible. This is in the Book of Jasher. Madame Blavatsky, when you get into theosophy and kind of getting into the Luciferian kind of end of it, she documents this as well. If you get into Eustace Mullins, who is a huge racist, but he wrote about Nimrod, and he said, Nimrod, if you're going to study like esoterics, like theology, Nimrod is the most essential thing you need to study, because he had the skins of Adam and Eve, which made him invincible. So you see this story laced in ancient Persian text, ancient biblical text, coming into the Hebrews and the Talmud. You see this in the Bible, and then what you end up seeing is Nimrod. He was said to have put this skin on at the age of 20 in the Book of Jasher, and in the age of 22 by Madame Blavatsky. And I think that's because she's trying to relate it to this esoteric idea, this Freemasonic number of the builder, or the number of the master builder within Freemasonry, right? Because you have 11, which is the idea, 22, which is the work, the number of the master builder, right? And then you have 33, which is the completion of the great work, right? So it's this philosophy that kind of gets into timescapes and how things function through time. And but nonetheless, that Nimrod, he was the one that ends up building the Tower of Babel, right? So this kind of carries in, and this is the beginnings of Freemasonry when we look at the Tower of Babel with Nimrod. And if you go into Mackey, A.G. Mackey, who is a Freemasonic historian, right? He wrote the Masonic Encyclopedia. He wrote the history of Freemasonry. I mean, he's written. I mean, the Masonic Encyclopedia. You know, it's like a brick. It's just huge. And he says, you know, if you go back to the earliest Masonic constitutions, they all accredit Nimrod as being the first Freemason.
Look at that, bro.
Yeah, yeah.
I wouldn't have known that. I didn't know that until today, bro. You know that.
Yeah. So it gets very biblical.
It gets very biblical. Yeah.
Oh,
They've studied. All of these arts have been here for a very long time, bro. Very long time, man.
Before recorded history, man.
Yeah. I was talking to my friend. Shout outs to Jeremy Livesey. He's a comedian, and we were talking about how he let me run. He's probably gonna get pissed off if I read it, but I don't care. He said we were talking last night briefly, and he mentioned something that he's been doing. And this is what he said. He goes, the Satanists stole the magic and corrupted it. Our grandparents followed the church and look at how far it got them. I am full-blown Christ magic style these days. I know what he meant by that. And I told him, holy snap, bro. I can't believe what you just said because I've been thinking and saying something. And then he goes, we started talking about the spiritual authority and everything. And I told him, you know what? I agree with this. Using numerology, studying the stars, right? Even ancient mysticism and divinity doesn't make it bad. Not all divinity is holy. So it does come down to intent. My personal opinion, right? So all of these arts and scripts and scrolls have been here for a very long time, and they're going to surpass us for another.
So now it's interesting, and when you follow that through and you start to get to the character of Enoch, right? Enoch is related to, when you look at the ancient texts, they relate him to Zoroaster. They relate him to Hephaestus. Hephaestus was the one who brought people out of the forest and gathered them around fires and started to create civilization again, right? And Zoroaster, he was the one that you know, you get into Zoroastrianism with, you know, Ahura Mazda, which is the divine light, and and there's a bad force as well that was like an abortion of the light, but he worshiped fire and kind of ties that in with Nimrod being the first one to worship fire. And so you have these early characters that in it, some people think there's a confusion in the biblical bloodlines as far as meshing the families to hide the serpent line, right? But when you get into Enoch, he was the one that said, well, you know, they said he invented writing. He was the one that he's tied in with the fallen angel Penemu, who was the one who educated humans and basically edified them and showed them, you know, things. There's just but it's a question as to when you start looking at the history of these arts and these crafts, right? Some of these crafts, I mean, they say if you read Josephus, who was the Jewish historian that was captured by Rome. So a lot of people kind of have to, you know, say you have to kind of be a little weary of Josephus because he turned on his own people. But he says that it was because of the prophecies of Adam, saying that the world would be destroyed by a fire one time and by water one time, that it caused Enoch to, you know, and he's accredited with astronomy. He's
Mm,
accredited with watching because the idea was they wanted to know the exact time in the heavens when this cycle would be over and humanity could rise back into the divine realms, right? So
no.
it gets into like the Kali Yuga, how they talk about we fall into the darkness and then we rise back up, and kind of gets into Buddhism. And you have the
Mm,
Bodhisattva that's going to help. He's going to be the last one to go back to the pureness of divinity, being
mm,
nirvana, when the
mm,
cycle's over, after everyone is elevated back into the pure spaces. So you see
mm,
this story consistently in all these different religions, and but yeah, some of these arts um are believed to be good, because even Jesus says, he talks about the signs in the heavens,
mm,
and he
mm,
talks about the fact that he is the bright and morning star. He's taking the authority away from the ancient Ishtar cult and kind of recognizing that through the line and the priesthood of Melchizedek.
mm,
So, but it was said that either Seth built these pillars or Enoch built these pillars. These are
mm,
also called the pillars of Lamech in some places, right?
mm,
Where before the flood, they built these two pillars.
mm,
And one was made out of lattice work, as the Masons say, which is brickwork, right? Because that ties
mm,
in with Masonic ideology. And
mm.
that had and it was hollow, so that if the world was destroyed by water, that it would float and then it would settle in a new place, right? And then
Uh,
the other one was made of, it was just engraved in stone, so that if the world was destroyed by fire, that all the and this was all of the information. This was what they call the seven sacred sciences, which were said
yeah.
to be they were said to be taught to Adam when they were in the divine realm of the garden, by the angel of the face, is what one of the texts says, right? And so then they come down to earth, and they build this stone circle with this altar. And then you get into the Cain and Abel, and a lot of people. There's a line of thinking that Cain killed Abel because Cain was a vegetarian, and oh yeah, well, he sacrificed the best of the crops, right? But the storm god of the time, Yahweh or El, he, he wanted blood sacrifice. And the very first sacrifice, so basically Cain is sacrificing Abel as you
Mm,
know, as the sacrifice. But
mm,
they say the first blood sacrifice was actually Adam, and he had fallen down into a precipice, and he had hurt himself, and he was bleeding, and God had to come down. And this is in a old Persian text, right? But
mm.
God had to come down and help him heal his wounds, and that's where we got the ability for the body to heal, basically, right? And Adam gathered up all of the leaves and all of the dirt and dust that had the blood, and he burned it on the altar to God, and that was said to be the first blood
Oh,
sacrifice.
look at that go,
Yeah,
bro.
yeah. So, I get really deep into a lot of this stuff, man. I mean, I
You
think
are, dude, you're a wealth of information, bro. You're a
it's
historian, bro. What a buff.
it's the most fascinating thing that we have, and it also connects us to who we are as people, and gives us a bigger um mythos, a bigger history of the power that we have in this realm, and our power to be able to take that and direct it through some of these arts of manifestation, and recognizing the patterns within the systems.
Recognizing pattern in front of the system. That's what the book was about. And I'm gonna mention the book again, guys. Liminal
Yeah.
trees. I'm telling you. Yeah, I'm telling you that trees are portals, basically. I brought you scientific and scripture proof. I brought you mythos, like homeboy just said right now. I brought you guys some history and I connected it all. But it's not just telling you that trees are portals, bro. I'm telling you how to recognize patterns where you were taught not to recognize patterns. That's basically all
Right.
it is, because life isn't about creating or finding yourself. It's like what Homeboy just said. It's about remembering who the hell you
Mm,
are. And the only
mm,
way to do it is by not repeating the mistakes that our ancients did. and knowing your history. Very important stuff. On the way out, man, let them know again one more time where they can find you and a few last words. And I have one last question right before we walk out.
Yeah, R Marx or Robby Marx, artist, illustrator, and you can find all my links at my link tree, which is linktree RMARX. And if you want to support me, you can go check out my Etsy or my website and purchase some of my art. And that's a great way to connect with me.
That's right. Make sure you check them out. Marx, I have one last question. What is your favorite emotion?
My favorite emotion, love conquers all, man. You know, it's the most supreme vibration in the universe. You know, it is what will carry us out of the darkness. You know, having love, trying to treat everyone as you would like to be treated. You know, having empathy for people, realizing that we're all having issues and problems, and we're all fighting our own interpersonal battles, and just try to, you know, not be so reactive to the boiling world around you. You know, really, you have to center yourself, come into yourself, and kind of try to and you know, and they've proven even that when you get all upset and you know you're in these different states of anxiety, that your body produces cortisol, which
1000%.
shortens your life. But if you bring yourself into a higher state where you're more like outside viewing and trying to heal and make better, versus instantly reacting and trying to force your way through the situation, you know, at your own angst. It's I think, you know, we need to realize that we just really need to kind of slow down and
Wow.
kind of bring ourselves back together with one another, because they've so separated us.
Yeah,
You
it's
know,
the unity,
oh
communion
yeah,
of
yeah,
one each
yeah.
other's spiritual. Yeah, man, I hear
You
you.
know, and I and
1000%.
I for the last 35 years, I travel around the country, man. And I used to vend at festivals. I go to these big festivals and I hang out and I talk about these ancient enlightenment philosophies, you know, through these networking of at these giant events, you know. And I think most importantly, as far as the emotion that you're asking about, when you look into these ancient mystery schools and you go back to the original, you know, Kush and the mystery schools that he established, you know, they were about the centering and knowing of thyself, the bringing oneself into a higher state of understanding, so that you
Awareness.
yourself can move into those higher realms of being. That's what these original mystery schools were about. And then Nimrod, when Nimrod came in and he kind of took it all over, he kind of really turned some of them dark, you know, into the points of cannibalism. But this is the whole story, man. This is the story of us, you know,
That's the
through the
story. Yeah.
history, because
Both
we
good and bad and
all,
ugly.
right, we are all fallen, and we all have to disassociate ourselves into these pieces, and then we have to bring ourselves back together into the new person, into
Wow.
you know, like Gandalf, you know, when he falls down into the pit and battles the demon, you know, and he's Gandalf the Gray, and he comes back and then he's like leveled up, you know, he
Yeah.
becomes Gandalf the White. You know, so it's like this is the individual job of every person, is to basically, you know, take this journey, know thyself, center yourself, try to participate in these higher vibrational forms, and try to work to better everyone around you. Be the change you want to see in the world.
Damn. Starts where your 2 feet lay. I say this all the time on the show.
Yes.
You can't change the presidents. You can't change war. You can't change anything else unless you start changing yourself. Thought pattern, habits, consciousness, awareness. It starts within you. That is right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Make sure you check them out. It's going to be in the description of the show. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for not only coming here and bringing the fire of history, but also giving it a beautiful ending portion of the show. Congratulations on your new book. Make sure you push that out, and then when you can, hey, let me know, and I'll push it out if it was one of my own, bro. I love and respect. I pray over your health and your wealth, and that everything around you becomes something fruitful for you and for others that consume it. Make sure you, ladies and gentlemen, to drop a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify. That allows other people to enjoy the show as much as I enjoy making it. And I like to say this on the way out of every single episode. Guys, be humble, but don't you dare be invisible. Peace.